We've looked at the beginning with our list of the 10 best console launch titles, but now it's time to look at the end. That's not to suggest that it's all doom and gloom. The end of a console can be a good thing, unless it's the Nokia N-Gage, of course. I believe you could have taken down Nintendo. We hear all the time that it's about the journey, not the destination, but surely the ending still matters, yes? I mean, The Village could have been good if it weren't for the ending. Maybe. Can we pay someone to take away M. Night Shyamalan's typewriter just as he gets to the final few pages of all of his scripts, please? Anyway, my point is that it does matter where a console ends up. Does it go out with a bang or a whimper? Does it leave fans wanting more or dancing on the casket? Or in the less common third option that we're focusing on today, does it puzzle the living hell out of everybody? I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are the 10 strangest final games for consoles. Number 10. Worms, Atari Jaguar. Atari is often remembered for taking popular arcade games like Pac-Man, Asteroids, and Missile Command and bringing them into the living room. In short, Atari is a brand synonymous with quality. That's the end of the entry. I don't want to talk about the Atari Jaguar. I don't care if it's 64 bits. I don't even know what bits are. Alright, fine. The Jaguar was Atari's last ever console. Not because it was intended to be Atari's swansong, going out on a high, but because it was such an apocalyptic failure that it flung Atari out of the console market like it was an unwilling drunkard at closing time, shouting obscenities like "CD add-on" as it staggered home. The Jaguar was discontinued in 1996 after only 3 years on shelves, but the final game release didn't come until 1998. After Atari abandoned the platform, a company called Telegames tried to keep the Jaguar alive for some reason, becoming the only publisher actually releasing games on it. So did the Jaguar end on a release that truly epitomized Atari? Maybe a port of a classic arcade game for one last hurrah? No, the Jaguar died with Worms. Now, Worms is a brilliant game, to be sure, but is it what comes to mind when you think of Atari? I bet most of you never even knew it came out on the Jaguar, and before I recorded this voiceover, neither did I. Number 9. Just Dance 2020, Nintendo Wii. Nintendo's motion-controlled system was part of the 7th generation of consoles, alongside the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. Sony and Microsoft discontinued their consoles in 2016, but production of the Wii stopped in 2013 in Japan and 2011 in Australia. So why did the Wii not last as long as its competition when it comfortably outsold them? Well, because Nintendo was focusing on prepping the Wii U. That, went well, didn't it? Even so, the Wii was still getting games long after Nintendo stopped making the thing. In fact, its final release did not come until November of 2019. I get the Wii was popular, but that is a ludicrously long time. Just Dance 2020, from a series that doesn't quite understand how the Gregorian calendar works, is a confusing addition to the Wii library. Each installment in the franchise is fundamentally the same, to the point that it has a subscription service with songs that can be used across multiple years of Just Dance games. Therefore, if Ubisoft could add whatever new songs it liked to Unlimited, was Just Dance 2020 really needed on the Nintendo Wii? We think no. Number 8. Alien Invasion, Fairchild Channel F. Don't you just love the Fairchild Channel F? Sure you do, all the kids are playing them nowadays. And what does the F stand for? Fun, of course, because what could better represent fun than this? Oh, we're gonna have to slow down before this party gets too wild. The Fairchild Channel F's final game was Alien Invasion in 1981. Strangely though, they stopped making the console in 1983. What were they doing instead of making another game for 2 years? Why would they keep making the Fairchild Channel F if there wouldn't be any more games for it? There are so many questions, and something tells me that Alien Invasion doesn't contain the answer to any of them. This game is exactly what you'd think it would be, a bad Space Invaders clone. They might as well have called it Invaders Presumably from Space. Considering the low quality of other games on the system though, Alien Invasion may well have qualified as ending on a high. We're just so confused by its release date. Number 7. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, Nintendo Wii U. The greatest game to ever appear on the Wii U, as verified by Metacritic, is also the last game on the Wii U. If you're going to hit your peak potential, it's probably best to not do it on your deathbed. As already mentioned, the Wii U didn't set the world alight. It had the usual production line of Mario platformer, Mario Kart sequel, and ports from other consoles, but the Wii U never had that special game that made you think, yeah, I need to get me one of those. At least not until Breath of the Wild. It was the perfect system seller and a long-awaited entry in one of gaming's most beloved franchises. It may have even had the potential to single-handedly save the Wii U. Unfortunately though, as I'm sure you all know, it also served as a launch title for the Switch, which had already dug the Wii U's grave and was just waiting to fill it in. Impeccable timing. Number 6. Gremlins, Atari 5200. Gremlins being on an Atari console is a perfect idea. Two American icons of the 80s seems like an ideal combination to me. Or at least it would have been if Gremlins hadn't ended up on Atari's little-loved 5200 console. The Atari 5200 was intended to replace the 2600. You can tell because the number after Atari has increased. Are you listening, Microsoft? Why would you want a measly 2600 when you could have a 5200? It's simple mathematics, just like the PlayStation 2 is 2 times better than the PlayStation 1, and the Xbox One is 360 times worse than its predecessor. Oh god, that's going to upset a lot of viewers. In reality, however, the 5200 represented a big step down in popularity. The 2600 sold around 30 million units and was the first console ever to do so. The 5200 sold only 1 million. In fact, the 5200 died a full 8 years before the 2600 did. As for Gremlins itself, well, it was okay, and certainly better than the Gremlins game that released at the same time for the 2600. It's just strange that the 5200's last game came out years before the end of the system that it was made to replace. Number 5. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, Nintendo 64. The N64 was discontinued in April of 2002. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 was ported to the N64 in August of 2002. Now that might not sound too remarkable on its own, but there is some strangeness afoot here. Edge of Reality was known for two things: mediocre games based on established licenses, and ports. They are the developers responsible for bringing the Pro Skater trilogy to the N64. Porting those games to many different platforms was understandable. They are, after all, pretty incredible. Pro Skater 2 on PS1 is the second highest rated game of all time on Metacritic, after all. However, it's worth noting that Pro Skater 3 was released on the PS1 and PS2 after the Nintendo GameCube had come out, making an N64 port a slightly strange choice. Most of the civilized world had even abandoned cartridges by the time the N64 itself was released in 1996, let alone by the time the GameCube was released. Porting disc-based games to obsolete technology then can't have been the easiest thing for developers to do. So why, when Nintendo already had a disc-based successor, did someone think it would be a good idea to cram Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 onto a cartridge months after the console had been discontinued? In fact, it's hard to even argue that this is a true Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 port, because the technological limitations were so dire that they had to actually remake the game using the Pro Skater 2 engine so it would actually run on the Nintendo 64. Was it really worth the effort? Who can say? Well, I can. It wasn't. Number 4. STICKYBALLS, GIZMONDO. The GIZMONDO, or the knockoff Nokia N-Gage as I call it, had a very troubled life. Allow me to read you this passage from its Wikipedia article, which specifically talks about GIZMONDO executive Stefan Eriksson. it is quite something. The Gizmondo's problems were compounded by the involvement of Ericsson in Swedish organised crime and later for crashing a Ferrari Enzo in Malibu, California, which was apparently owned by the Royal Bank of Scotland. He pleaded guilty to numerous criminal charges, which led him to 2 years in jail. Poorly written, but very impressive. On top of those bizarre events, the company was also $300 million dues in debt by the time the Gizmondo came out. Combine all this with the fact that it didn't even manage to sell 25,000 units, and its failure is suddenly completely understandable. If we go by the Gizmondo's much maligned US release, the handheld had 8 games at launch. These 8 were also the last games released for the console in the US. Yes, you heard that right, the launch games were also the final games. For this reason, there isn't a definitive last game on the system, as they all came out at the same time, so let's go with the most popular, the beautifully named STICKYBALLS. It had a catchy intro song, but when Sticky Balls is your most popular game, you're not likely to be remembered all that fondly. Number 3. Pro Evolution Soccer 2014, PlayStation 2. Recent console generations almost ruined this list. Depending on which region you go by, the PlayStations 1, 2 and 3, the original Xbox and the GameCube all finished with annual sports games like FIFA, PES or Madden. That's not a strange way to end a console at all. Did they even want a spot on this list? However, one need only look a little closer. Though the PlayStation 2 ending with PES isn't strange, the PlayStation 2 ending with PES 2014 is absolute madness. For some context, in the same month that PlayStation 2 game was released, the PlayStation 4 was launched. If PES 2014 had been ported to the PS4 as well, this entry would have warranted the top spot. Of course, that never happened, because it would have been absolutely absurd to release a game on consoles 2 generations apart. What? FIFA 2014 released on PS2, 3 and 4? Who was doing these things? For even more context, this is PES 2014 for the PS2, and here is Killzone Shadowfall for the PS4, which came out 1 week later. Time flies, eh? Number 2. Sonic the Hedgehog, Sega Master System. It's almost poignant. Sonic the Hedgehog, the new face of Sega, designed to usher in the new generation, a new Genesis, if you will, ended up closing the previous chapter as well. It's not a direct port of the Mega Drive original either. It was completely redesigned to run on the 8-bit Master System and Game Gear. It borrowed a few themes and levels from its 16-bit counterpart, but that was it. This version of the game had a slower pace and a greater focus on exploration. There was even a rearranged version of the soundtrack in its sweet, hideous glory. Let's listen to a tiny snippet. So, is this a remake? No. A downscale? A demaster? I'm not exactly sure what to call it, but it is very odd. Games getting ported back a generation today might not seem so strange. Of course, the jump from late PlayStation 4 to early PlayStation 5 isn't all that noticeable when compared to the jump from 8 to 16 bits. I think that's why this version of Sonic the Hedgehog seems so unusual. It's the game we know, yet it's bracingly different. It's like peeking into another dimension to find that their blue hedgehog mascot doesn't look as good as ours. What a terrible place to live. I bet they got the original version of the Sonic movie as well. Oh, those teeth. And number 1, the many endings of the SNES. Oh yes, it's our very first number 1 spot wildcard entry, oh what a surprise! Mainly because actually identifying a final game for the SNES is far more difficult than it should really be. You could say that the last SNES release was Star Fox 2. It may not have been a proper release on cartridge, but it was developed for the system and finally released on the SNES Classic Edition in 2017. That's 19 years after the last physical SNES game. But even putting that aside, what was the last physical SNES game? Well, that's no clearer. If you go by the North American final release, both the SNES and the Sega Genesis ended with Frogger. That's a Nintendo console and a Sega console going out in the same year with the same Konami game from 17 years prior. It's true what they say, you're more like your nemesis than you realise. Except me, I am nothing like Rules Boss. If you go by the European final release, both the NES and SNES concluded with games based on The Lion King. Timon and Pumbaa's Jungle Games drew the SNES to a close in 1998, and The Lion King was the last game on the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1995. Why did both consoles culminate with Lion King related games in Europe specifically? Is it just a coincidence, or was that planned? How deep does this conspiracy go? There was even a minigame in Jungle Games that was a rip-off of Frogger. It's wheels within wheels. We're through the looking glass here, people. Still, whatever you wish to define as the final game on the SNES, all of those games have one thing in common, in that they're the last games in our list. Because that indeed is that. But do you have a favourite strange way that a console met its untimely or timely end? A particularly odd final release that's kept you up at night? Let us know in the comments below. You can follow myself and TripleJump on Twitter here, and if you want to support the things you enjoy, then check out the rewards on our Patreon. Finally, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. I've been Peter from TripleJump, and thanks for watching.